Welcome to Northern Powerhouses, our business success stories series of interviews where we discuss with local business leaders, their backgrounds, their successes, their challenges, and what drives them forward. And today I'm delighted to have with us Nicki Mitchell, partner at Jones Myers. And Nicki, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. And if you'd like firstly to introduce yourself, Jones Myers, and how you help your clients, that would be great.
Sure, thank you very much for having me. So my name's Nicki Mitchell and I'm a partner in Jones Myers. We are a specialist family law firm. So we just advise on all kinds of issues arising from relationship breakdown. We do it in all kinds of different ways, everything from the traditional court model to mediation through collaborative law. And we're a small but perfectly formed team of people who are very specialist at what we do.
Brilliant, thank you. And I guess unfortunately you probably would have felt a lot, from what we read, there's been a lot of people struggling with relationships over the last couple of years.
Certainly so. I mean, we have this usual thing every Christmas. People say to me, oh, you'll be really busy after Christmas. And I always say, well, and a lot of my colleagues will as well, so that's a myth. But actually this year it hasn't been a myth. And I think that's it. I think there's been this pent up thing where people have just had to get on with things and get on with people in some really difficult situations. And now that things are opening up again, people have come to the point where they think, I can't really live like this anymore. I need to get some advice as to what to do next. So sadly, yeah, we've been very busy through lockdown and since.
Yes, I can certainly imagine. So just sort of starting, it'd be great to know a little bit more about your background in specific and why Jones Myers in particular for you.
Yeah, so actually I didn't take a very straight line path to where I am now. I was a linguist, so languages are my thing at school and then at university where I did German and Italian. And then I went to Spain for a couple of years, like you do. I just always been interested in Spain, didn't want to sit anymore in a classroom and learn languages. So at the end of all of that, I thought, well, I need to get a proper job now, having enjoyed myself for a couple of years in Spain. I did work as well, but it was very enjoyable. So I came back here and I did a postgraduate translation diploma and worked as a technical translator. I worked for a pharmaceutical company actually, but knew immediately that really wasn't for me. So at that point, at the age of, I think I was about 28 and thought I was far too old to change direction, but I did change direction. And so I qualified, I think I started on that track about 1990 and here I am all these years later, specialising in family. So yeah, a bit of a change of direction.
Goodness, that's fascinating. Funny enough, I was speaking to somebody, I was doing an interview with somebody that studies a lawyer, but then went into a totally different field. So
yeah. Well, you could then, and you still can. They call it something else, and they do it very differently. But if you have a degree in something else, then there is a route whereby you can then divert into law. And quite often you get those backgrounds, that perspective on life, and the fact you're a little bit older can be really helpful in the law.
Yes, I'm sure that's the case. You've got life experiences to go with knowledge and expertise. That makes perfect sense. Exactly.
Yeah.
So looking back over this period, what are some of the challenges you've had to overcome?
I think law's a very kind of individual thing. A lot of the time you're on your own. You're on your feet in court, or you're with a client, and they're asking you questions that you don't know the answer to. And right from the outset, really, you have to develop a way of managing that when on the inside, you're probably feeling like you don't know the answers. And I'm really quite comfortable now, all these years on, that I don't know all the answers. And that's what makes the job interesting, that somebody will always ask you something you don't know. But I think that's the biggest challenge, is the kind of projecting without saying anything that's wrong, without talking a load of rubbish, giving clients the confidence that they're in safe hands. You can always look things up, but it's not so much about having every section of every statute in your head, every case name in your head. I'm not very good at that. but I can tell you what the principles are and apply them to your particular case. So I think it's been that learning how to project confidence and safety, whilst at the same time, you know, thinking, you know, lacking the confidence really on the inside. And that's years, a long, long time.
Yes. Yeah, goodness. No, and I can totally care. I mean, the phrase we picked up a long time ago, obviously we sort of operating, if you like, in a coaching, consulting, advising type role. And the phrase I picked up a long time ago from somebody was that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't agree more with that. I think you're entitled, with any professional, but the law in particular, you're entitled to expect your lawyer has the technical knowledge, they know the way around the law. You're entitled to that. The difference, what makes people stand out as the people who get the recommendations, is how you handle the people. And whether you care. And I think, you know, the lovely thing about Jones Myers, and I've worked in a number of different places, is that people really do care. We're very client focused. And genuinely, you know, employ a lot of individuals who it matters to if they do a good job for people.
I honestly don't, but I think it would be very difficult to pay lip service to it and not deliver on it, if that makes sense. Saying we care about people and when we don't is just, I can't, you know, people see through that sort of idea very quickly. So it is about a genuine, you know, a genuine caring is crucial, I think. In professional service.
Quite.
So what are some of the biggest learnings you've had over time in business and in life in general?
Oh, blimey, that's a big question. Just some of them. It's kind of all of this is kind of following on in the same vein, because I think the biggest thing that you can learn is that it's all about people. There are very few businesses where it isn't about the people. And I mean the people you work with, but also the people that you act for, the people who you represent. And I think some people are intimidated. Quite a lot of the people I work with at the moment are very successful, for a lot of consultants, business owners, and so on. But they're all still people. They're all still scared of the future underneath all of that. And quite often our people can say, oh, well, she is, you know, so much more confident, so much more competent than I am. But they almost certainly are just as scared about what the future looks like, because it's uncertain. So I think for me, that's my secretary will say that I'm not scared of anybody. And I'm not, but that's why, because I mean, professionally, obviously, if they're holding a gun to my head, that would be different. But I think, you know, if you just remember that they are scared like anybody else, they might not show it, and you talk to them on that level.
Great. I bang on. And you know, when we're operating in an emotional state, which many of us do a lot of the time, our decisions and our logic isn't always totally sound. So we can you know, the things we say, the things we do, and the decisions we make don't always make total sense. And it's accepting that as being, you know, nothing necessarily about us, it's just about them. And accepting that, I think, is really key. No, that's fascinating. It's a great learning, a really great learning. I remember our founder, funnily enough, it's a slightly different thing, but I remember our founder, Brad Sugars, talking about, you know, successful people. And you know, often they're the people that are shunned most in a room because people are too scared to talk about them, whereas they're often, you know. And I remember you say, look, if there's somebody in a room that you admire, go and tell them, because A, they'll probably appreciate it, B, they've probably got not, you know, that there aren't enough people talking to them, and they're just human beings.
Exactly. But actually, that makes me think the only person who I've been absolutely struck dumb by and couldn't speak to was Frank Skinner. So I went to a festival and he signed a book for me, and I just didn't know what to say.
Oh, that's lovely. That's really cool. He's great, isn't he?
Oh yeah, I love Frank Skinner. I think that's part, and also it's that thing that you know a lot about them. I've read his autobiography and all of that kind of. So what do you say? I mean, you know. Normally you know nothing about anybody, and the joy is finding out. But it's anyway. I'm frightened of nobody except Frank Skinner.
And it's okay to be a fan, you know, operate on that basis, isn't it? To just say, well, I don't know what to say. I'm yeah, dumbstruck. That's lovely. So, well, alongside Frank, potentially, who or what have been the biggest influences in your career?
Oh, well, talking professionally, I suppose, well, the first one will be my dad, and that's probably a bit of a cliche. I'd lost my dad when I was quite young,
Right.
but he is probably the biggest feminist influence in my life, because there's as far as he was concerned, there was absolutely nothing I couldn't do if I put my mind to it and put the work in. And so, you know, that certainly gave me an attitude to life and work and business from a very early age.
Yep.
And then I think probably in terms of my legal career, I worked for a woman called Sandra Keane, who was a bit of a legend. She's retired now. She had a small practice in York, and when I moved back to York, 'cause I'm from York originally,
Right.
I trained down south, and then I wanted to come back, so I worked with her. And she was just a really, again, why wouldn't you be able to, her attitude was, why wouldn't you be able to do that? You know, there's a lot of privilege in the law. There are a lot of privileged people, not everybody by any means, but she was, you know, a council estate girl from Leeds who was very clever and put the work in. So again, it was that attitude of, well, why wouldn't you be able to do that? Why don't you try for that if that's what you want to do? So I say probably Sandra was a big one as well.
Sorry, could you say that again? I think.
So Sandra Keane, she was called.
Sandra Keane. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, and brilliant. And again, you know, from what you said, you know, a different personality, different approach, and just common sense.
Yeah, absolutely. She was quite a character and still is, but she's not anymore.
Brilliant. And what I mean, did she or anyone else provide you with any, you know, favorite quotes or sayings that you live by? I love to collect great quotes.
The thing that sticks with me, and I don't know whether it's a favourite prose quote or what it is, but and again, it's a similar kind of thing. In the early days, so I really went to the firm to take over the civil practice side of things, so family and civil litigation. I mean, you know, I've specialised since then, but in those days, you were more general practitioners, really. Right. Sandra was a really able criminal lawyer, so she used to do all the criminal cases. I knew nothing about it, and she used to send me off to here, there, and everywhere to meet people in cells, and I didn't know what I was doing. And she always used to say, "Oh, you'll busk your way through it, love."
Brilliant.
So I learned to busk my way through things.
Love it. Love it.
I also, but I noticed that you know, as you get older, you turn in, you start saying these things. And I said to one of our solicitors the other day, I started to say something, she said, "Yeah, I know, you say that all the time." And that was, when it comes to documents, I think people are frightened of forms and filling forms in. And I always say, tell them what you want them to know, not what the form asks for. So that's one that's, I think I'm getting a bit boring with at work, but I think, you know, that's the thing. Sometimes what you, particularly when you're presenting a case to a court or something, there are forms, statements are different, but there are forms that are quite restrictive. So sometimes you put what you want them to know, you don't answer the question necessarily. Yep,
that makes sense. No, and you know, again, a common sense quote that makes sense. So it's great. I just love picking up, you know, quotes from people about like my favorite is actually from a few weeks ago was a local restaurateur. You may not know, but he just said, and I heard different quotes along these lines, but this was so simplistic. And he said, "Never look backwards because you're not going in that direction." And
yeah, that's really good. That's good.
I like it, because, you know, most people spend a lot of time looking backwards about what, you know, and okay, we need to learn from the past, but that's about it, really. past isn't the future. So I just love that saying.
Yeah, that's a great one.
What I mean, again, just delving a bit deeper, what would you say you've learnt about yourself as your career's developed?
I am I think I'm resilient, and I'm also more of a risk taker than I ever thought I was.
Right.
I think a lot of lawyers aren't. The perception of lawyers is that they're not.
Yes.
There are different types of lawyers, and perhaps people who work more in, court work, contentious work, perhaps are more so. But yeah, I quite like change. I quite like a challenge, and that involves an element of risk sometimes. But that's what keeps me going, really.
Yeah, risk is an interesting thing, I think, and certainly from a business perspective, certainly my field is that, and I agree to some extent that when you're looking at business contracts, business decisions, there's very little profit without risk. Therefore, making a commercial decision. I mean, and I think lawyers are great in for pointing out what could happen, but ultimately, the profit is often made by accepting that could happen, but will mitigate the likelihood of it happening, while hopefully, making a contractual deal that's going to work for everybody.
Absolutely, I agree. I mean, you can overthink these things to the point of paralysis, can't you?
Absolutely, and things move too fast for us to do that, I think, in general. And how, I mean, I'm interested to know, how resilience has served you, because I certainly the last couple of years that will be something I would imagine that you've had to put call on. But in what other sort of scenarios has that been really useful to you?
Sorry, there's a cat there. I don't know if you can see it, really.
It's Zoom at home. That's what happens.
No, and I can't keep him out either because the doors don't shut properly. So I suppose it serves you well anywhere. I mean, in your personal life, as well. I mean, thankfully, we've all got through COVID unscathed, touch wood, so I haven't had any terrible trauma to deal with there.
Right.
But just the kind of general cut and thrust of life, and I think a lot of people have a tendency to overthink things and beat yourself up about things. But I think as I've got older, I have decided there's no point in that, and you just move on. You're not perfect, you move on from it, and you grow, don't you?
Brilliant. No, I completely agree. I've found myself over the last few years is being more in tune with my emotions and reactions about situations, and if they don't serve me, if they're negative and don't serve me, or my beliefs or my fears, then thank you very much for giving me a tap on the shoulder, but I don't choose to engage, because it's not going to help. If it helps me, then that's fine. If something makes me take action or make decisions, that's great. But often I think a lot of the sort of negative, fearful feeling thoughts, typically, as you mentioned earlier, can create paralysis, and that's definitely not going to help or serve.
No, absolutely not. And it's also that thing, sometimes it's important to just make the decision and move on, isn't it? Yes. And you can only do that knowing that if it's wrong, then you'll just have to deal with the consequences.
Yeah, yes. I was talking to somebody about this recently, and something I learned in my first business, where we were very, very fast moving. There wasn't much time to make a decision. I'm not suggesting everything was done totally on the fly, but you did a bit of analysis, and then but a decision had to be made. And the thing I had to live by was make a decision and then make it the right one by my actions. So because I couldn't know it was the right decision. It was just, by the time you knew it was the right decision, it's too late. I think that's the key thing, is a decision foolproof is way too late. And I think obviously we've always got to be conscious that maybe it was the wrong one, and what does that look like. But once you made a decision, we can affect the outcome a lot by our actions, I believe. And I think that's
absolutely,
quite important to do. So obviously we've talked a little bit about you coming through the last few years and the past, but looking forward, what's on the horizon for you, for Jones Myers, and what challenges might you be facing?
Oh, that's a really good question. Because if you think what's happened, when I first qualified in the law, we were still, sewing together pieces of parchment, not parchment, but thick paper. Literally, you had secretaries had to sew. It was pink string for High Court and green string for County Court. There were
Brilliant.
nothing. It was a real art.
Yeah.
But and then the idea was you couldn't then replace anything. It was to stop things being forged and so on. And there's nothing like that now. You can, goodness knows what you can do with a PDF. And so if I project back from there to where I am now and see how it's changed, there was no email, and you get your post in the morning, and the phone would ring, but that was it. So I dread to think what's going to happen in the next however many years. But I think the essence of what we do and the impact it has on people, I don't think will change. I think it's scary to think about things like artificial intelligence, and there are people saying that'll replace lawyers, and it probably will replace some of the skills, but it won't. It's not that human element. People still need to be supported through difficult times by somebody who knows what they're doing. So I'm not sure. So I think that I'm sure we're now on electronic bundles, so there's no paper in court.
Yeah. Right.
You've got it on a device with a hyperlink, and I really struggle with that because of how do you prepare, how do you make notes? So I'm not entirely paperless, and there will be more and more of that, some of that's good, but also has its disadvantages, I think. But I'm not convinced that the essence of what we do and people needing that is going to change enormously.
Yes. No. I and going back to what you said earlier is I would suggest that the pure factual knowledge of what we do could be replaced by something that was more automated. But it's you said at the start that the difference is the customer care, the is caring about our clients. I don't believe we're ever going to get machines or machine thinking that can care about clients.
No.
That's what will differentiate, I think, any business that's a service based on or a knowledge or based business. It's how we deliver the service, not what the service is. And it's understanding that, because people will, I suspect people will always want to deal with people, even if the information they get provided by is coming from a different source.
Well, I agree. There's been a lot of, over the lockdown, everything has been accelerated, hasn't it, in terms of learning how to deal with technology, in terms of being aware of people. And a lot of people, you find out quite a lot about yourself. You find out quite a lot about your friends and whether you're an introvert or an extrovert.
Yes.
But that kind of need to. What I found was interesting was that, yes, I was with my nearest and dearest all the time, and that was very nice. My children had one was on the verge of going off, and one had gone off and then came back with an extra, actually, with his flatmate. We had a house full. So that was lovely. But what I realised that I missed was interactions with people who I know and like, but don't know that well. Do you know what I mean? That kind of pint after work on the way home with somebody who you work with but don't necessarily know that well, and interactions with people elsewhere. So we are fundamentally programmed to be social animals, aren't we?
Yes, without doubt. And that's what everyone's going to have to deal with moving forward for the next 2 or 3 years. Is most people can actually operate more effectively in this environment, in Zoom environment, not having to travel whether it's to work or to a client or a client to us. All this is very effective, and I believe transfer of information and knowledge is very effective in this mechanism, because spoken, it's very, very quick and easy to share a document. We can work collaboratively, probably more easy than even sitting with somebody sharing. So all those things are effective, but ultimately we are social animals. So we, some part of working day, week and month likely needs that level of interaction. But what that looks like is really interesting. Does it need to be work-based interaction, or is it just that we have more social time within, as part of the business? So, rather than, the odd chat around a coffee, as you say, what about after work? What about, social dinners or things where people can probably connect probably more strongly than they would, with a very, quick meeting or quick chat over a coffee or
yeah.
And who knows? I mean, I'm fascinated to find out what people think the future is and what it's going to look like, because everyone I meet is not sure, including myself.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And there's contradictory evidence coming out now, isn't there? I heard something on the radio the other day about how people are working longer hours remotely, but aren't as productive. I'm not quite sure what sectors they were and how they measured it, but they reckon that people were filling their diaries with meetings that they wouldn't otherwise have, partly because of the need for social interaction. And there are certainly, I mean, I'm a mediator, and you can mediate online. And as you say, it's about exchange of financial information and that kind of thing. That can be quite effective. But I am unconvinced, other mediators would disagree, but I am unconvinced that the process of getting people together to try and work out what they need to do together can be as effective when they're not in the same room.
Yeah.
So there's another thing, is tension. A client of mine said at the time, he said, well, I go to China for 3 days and you can bet your bottom dollar I come back with a contract. But if I'm sitting in my jogging bottoms at the kitchen table talking to somebody in China, there's not the same incentive.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, great point. It'd be interesting. I mean, as I say, I have no real idea. I've got some beliefs, but it's just be interesting to see how things pan out. We definitely see, as you said earlier, quite rightly, we saw that, technology, the use of technology advanced in the first 6 weeks of lockdown faster than it would have in the previous 6 years, I think.
Yeah.
So we've always had this step change, and now I guess it's about working out what it all means and how we deal with it moving forward, because maybe we've gone too fast for many people, and what that looks like. And I guess the whole sort of mental health issue, piece about people's mental health being affected and what that means is, I suspect we'll be learning more and more, for years to come.
I'm sure.
So it's been absolutely fascinating, Nicki. A couple of sort of very sort of interesting questions potentially. I'm interested in your answers. Just to sort of wrap up a little bit. What would you say to anyone that was thinking of going up? The question always going into business, but also into the law, I guess. Right now.
Well, I think being in business gives you a sense of autonomy that you wouldn't get in being employed in a huge organisation. So if that's something that motivates you, then do it, and take the risk within reason. Obviously, do your research, but take the risk, because who knows? It might go wrong, but it might go very well.
Brilliant. That's very sound advice. I think it's a fairly consistent statement for many people I've interviewed, which is, do it. And it's gone from broad to long. A couple of them just said, just do it. Or I think somebody even said, do it sooner. But,
I think I would add to that, do it with the right people. Because having worked in different organisations, obviously, it goes without saying, doesn't it? There are different cultures, but I think that is really fundamental. Yes. I feel where I am now is the best possible culture for me. And different things suit different people, but I think if you're going to make a big commitment in business, it needs to be with the right people for you.
It's really interesting you said that, because I've got a very strong belief that values and purpose should be the core of every business. Our values, to a point where I've always believed good relationships come with a match of goals. We both want to achieve the same thing, but great relationships come with a match of values. We both think the same things are important. And so as a business, being clear on those and telling people about those is going to mean we bet more likely attract customers, team members, and suppliers that align better to us.
Yeah.
And rather than what we want to achieve, it's who we are and what's important. And so I totally align with that. I think values are so crucial to
Absolutely.
just everything we do in business.
Mm-hmm.
So I totally get that. So finally, an interesting question, hopefully for you. What would be the best advice you would give an 18-year-old you?
Oh, I would say don't be so scared. It'll be okay. Don't be afraid of doing things your way as well. Obviously, you need to learn, and you can't run before you can walk, and all the rest of it. But I think there's always a worry amongst younger people that they need training, or they need to shadow people, or they need to see how other people do it. And yes, that's true to an extent, but there comes a point where you've just got to do it, and then you work out how you do it your way. The world will be very boring if we're all the same as the people that came before us.
I completely agree. What a brilliant answer. I love it. Yes, absolutely. Don't be afraid and just do it your way. And
yeah,
ultimately, if a number of people hadn't done it that way, we wouldn't have had innovation or change or
precisely.
anything.
Precisely. Yeah. And that's what I find that interesting with clients sometimes. I've had some clients that really challenge you thinking. You say, well, no, it doesn't work like that. And they say, well, why not? I mean, what about this? And you go with it, and 9 times out of 10 it works, because it works for them. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm a big component of the idea of not can I, but how can I? And it totally changes that question to just why wouldn't
I'll try that. That sounds good.
Oh, great, thank you. Well, if it's useful, that's great. But it's too easy to get into can I or can't I, but how can I? That opens up a whole world of possibilities, and if every single one of those isn't viable, then we can't. But it's normally A or B, and but it can be A to anything we want it to be, and that's hopefully that's I'm glad if that's been of use. That's wonderful. But, well, Nicki, it's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for spending the time with us and just talking about your career and what you do, and the care that you have for the people you work with. It comes across very clearly, and that's a wonderful thing to see. So thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.